Hey everyone, future diplomats and anyone who wants to understand the world a bit better. You know, if you're prepping for the UPSC exam, international relations is a huge EE part of it. And sometimes those IR theories can feel, well, pretty dense.
Like a jungle.
Yeah, a jungle exactly. But don't worry, today we're going on a deep dive into a part of that jungle that can really boost your understanding and your exam performance. We're talking about critical perspectives in international relations.
And these perspectives, they go beyond just the academic stuff. They give you powerful tools to analyze what's happening in the world, which is, well, crucial for tackling those UPSC questions.
For sure. It's like getting a new lens to look at global events. We're talking
Right.
about challenging those mainstream theories you've probably already encountered.
Right, the big ones like realism and liberalism.
Exactly. Critical perspectives, they dig deeper and ask tough questions about power, inequality, and the very systems that shape global politics.
They really make you think differently about how the world works.
Okay, so let's get started. What makes these perspectives so critical?
Well, they usually share a couple of key ideas. One is that theory and practice are intertwined. The way we think about the world directly influences how we act in it.
So it's not just about observing what's going on, but
Right.
about understanding how our own ideas and biases might be shaping things.
Exactly. And the second common thread is this commitment to challenging the status quo. They shine a light on inequalities and injustices that often get overlooked by those mainstream approaches.
Okay, so they're not afraid to shake things up a bit.
Not at all. Let's take an example. Imagine there's a conflict between two countries. A realist might just see it as a straight-up power struggle, right? But a critical theorist might ask, hold on, what historical injustices or economic disparities led to this conflict in the first place?
They'd want to understand the root causes, not just the surface level clash.
Right. And they'd also ask, who's really benefiting from this situation and who's suffering the most?
It's like they're peeling back the layers to reveal the power dynamics at play.
Exactly. And that's what makes these perspectives so valuable. They add depth to our understanding of how things really work in international relations.
Okay, I'm ready to dive into some specifics. Let's start with a big one, Marxism. It's a term that gets thrown around a lot.
It does, and it often gets oversimplified. At its core, Marxism argues that economic forces are the driving force of history.
So for Marxists, it's all about the money.
To a large extent, yes. It shapes how societies function, how they're organized. Think about classical Marxism, developed by, well, Karl Marx himself. He emphasized this idea called the materialist conception of history.
Okay, break that down for me. What's that all about?
Basically, it means that the way we organize our economic systems, it determines our social relations, our political institutions, even our ideas.
Wow, so our whole worldview is shaped by economics.
According to Marx, yes. And in a capitalist system like the one, well, most of the world operates under,
Right.
you have this fundamental divide between the owners of capital, the capitalists, and the workers.
The haves and have-nots.
Exactly. And this division, Marx argued, creates inherent contradictions and inequalities. They lead to, well, conflict.
And this conflict isn't just within one country, right?
Right. That's where Lenin's ideas about imperialism come in. He built upon Marx's work and argued that capitalism's constant need for expansion drives powerful countries to seek new markets and resources.
So they go out and colonize other parts of the world.
Often, yes. Lenin saw imperialism as an economic phenomenon driven by the pursuit of profit, not just political domination.
So even after colonies gained political independence, these economic relationships persisted.
Precisely. And that's a key insight that's still relevant today when we
Right.
look at the relationship between, well, the global north and the global south.
It's like colonialism morphed into new forms, even without the outright political control.
Exactly. And this is where neo-Marxism comes in. It takes those classical Marxist ideas and applies them to the contemporary world. One of the key neo-Marxist theories is dependency theory.
Dependency theory. Yeah, that's a big one in international relations. Can you
Mhm.
give us the rundown?
Of course. Dependency theory argues that even though many former colonies are now politically independent, right,
Right.
they remain economically dependent on those former colonizers or on the developed world more broadly.
So it's like the system is rigged against them.
In many ways, yes. This dependency is maintained through things like unequal trade relationships, debt burdens, and control over key resources. It's a system where wealth tends to flow from the less developed countries to the more developed ones.
Okay, so dependency theory helps explain why so many countries struggle to develop despite gaining political independence.
Exactly. And it directly connects to UPSC syllabus topics like global inequality and development. It's really important for understanding those power dynamics.
Makes sense. So we've got classical Marxism, Lenin, dependency theory. What else should we know about this whole Marxist perspective?
Well, there's one more key concept I want to touch on. It's crucial for understanding how power operates in the global system. Gramsci's concept of hegemony.
Hegemony. Isn't that just a fancy word for domination?
It is, but it's a bit more nuanced than that. Gramsci argued that power isn't just about brute force, right? It's also about shaping consent.
Okay, interesting.
Hegemony refers to the ability of dominant groups to maintain their power by making their worldview seem like common sense, like the natural order of things.
So it's not just forcing people to do what you want, but making them believe it's in their own best interest.
Exactly. It's about creating a system where the values and ideas of the ruling class become, well, so deeply embedded that they seem unquestionable.
It's like setting the rules of the game so everyone has to play by your rules.
That's a great way to put it. And it makes you think, right? Who benefits from the existing global order? And whose voices are being silenced?
It's a great question.
Hmm?
And it makes me want to learn even more about these critical perspectives. I'm ready to keep going.
Well, stay tuned because we're just getting started. There's a whole world of critical theory out there, each with its own unique insights. Welcome back. We're just getting into the nitty-gritty of Marxism and how it critiques those global power structures.
Yeah, it's super relevant, especially for anyone trying to grasp the complexities of international relations. Like, well, those of us prepping for the UPSC exam.
Absolutely. But as we mentioned, Marxism isn't the only game in town. There are other critical voices out there that offer unique insights.
Okay, so let's hear them. What about social constructivism? I've come across that term, but it seems pretty different from the Marxist theories we were just discussing.
It is. Social constructivism really shakes things up. It moves away from focusing solely on material factors like, economics, and instead highlights how ideas and norms and even identities shape how countries interact.
So it's not just about military power or economic strength, but also about perceptions and shared beliefs.
Exactly. Social constructivists would argue that the international system isn't some fixed, objective reality. It's something that's constantly being created and reinforced through interactions between countries and the shared understandings they develop.
So how does that work in practice? Can you give me an example?
Sure. Think about the concept of sovereignty. The idea that states have ultimate authority within their own borders.
Right. That's like a fundamental principle of international relations.
Exactly. But social constructivists would say that it's not some objective truth. It's a norm that has evolved over time through interactions and agreements between states.
Wow. So the very foundation of the international system is actually, well, a social construct.
That's the argument they make. And it helps us understand how even seemingly fixed concepts in international relations can actually change and evolve over time. Like, think about how the idea of humanitarian intervention has challenged traditional notions of sovereignty.
Oh, that's a great point. So norms can shift and change depending on how states interact and what ideas gain prominence.
Exactly. It's a dynamic process. Now, what about post-structuralism? Have you heard of that one?
I have, but to be honest, it sounds a bit intimidating. Like, what even is it?
I get it. It can be a bit heady at first. But post-structuralism offers some really insightful critiques. It questions the idea that there are any grand narratives or objective truths that can fully explain the world, especially in the realm of international relations.
So it's like deconstructing the very language and frameworks we use to understand global politics.
You got it. Post-structuralists would say that language isn't neutral. It's loaded with power relations and can be used to, well, legitimize certain perspectives while marginalizing others.
Okay, I see what you mean. So even the way we talk about global issues can be a form of power.
Precisely. Think about the labels we use in conflicts, like terrorists versus freedom fighters. Those terms are far from neutral and can shape how we view the entire conflict.
Right. It's all about framing, isn't it? Like how certain actions are portrayed as humanitarian interventions, while others are condemned as aggression.
Exactly. Post-structuralism encourages us to look beyond the surface, to analyze how language and discourse shape our understanding of international lines.
That's a really useful skill to develop, especially if you're trying to analyze those complex international relations scenarios you might encounter in the UPSC exam.
Absolutely. Now, let's shift gears a bit and talk about feminism. It might seem like it doesn't fit in the world of international relations, but it's actually super important.
Okay, so how does feminism play a role in understanding global politics?
Well, feminist perspectives bring a much-needed focus on gender to what has traditionally been, well, a very male-dominated field.
Right. It's like women's voices and experiences have often been excluded from those dominant narratives.
Exactly. And feminist scholars point out that issues like war and peace and security, they're often viewed through a very masculine lens. And that lens often overlooks the ways in which women are disproportionately impacted by these issues.
It's about acknowledging the hidden costs of conflict, right? Things like sexual violence, displacement, the burden of caregiving.
Yes, things that are often neglected in traditional analyses. And feminist perspectives also push for greater representation of women in decision-making roles.
That makes a lot of sense, not just for achieving gender equality, but for building a more peaceful and just world for everyone.
Exactly. Now we've got two more to cover: green politics and post-colonialism. What comes to mind when you think about green politics?
Well, it seems pretty straightforward, right? It's about bringing environmental concerns to the forefront of global politics.
That's the gist of it. Green politics challenges the idea that human interests should always take priority. It emphasizes the interconnectedness of human societies and the natural environment.
So it's acknowledging that environmental problems like climate change, resource depletion, pollution, they don't stop at national borders.
Exactly. These are global issues that require global cooperation. Green theorists argue that our current economic and political systems are actually unsustainable.
And they're pushing for a more ecologically balanced approach to global governance, right?
Right. Think about the Paris Agreement, for example. That's a prime example of green politics in action on the international stage.
And it's not just about pragmatics either. They're also highlighting the ethical dimensions of environmental issues, arguing that we have a responsibility to protect the planet for future generations.
Absolutely. Now, last but not least, we have post-colonialism. It might not seem immediately relevant to international relations, but it really is.
Well, to me, it seems incredibly relevant, especially for understanding the power dynamics between the global North and South, which is, a key theme in the UPSC syllabus.
You're spot on. Post-colonialism is all about examining the legacies of colonialism and imperialism. It challenges those Eurocentric narratives that often dominate our understanding of history and progress.
So it's acknowledging that even though colonialism has formally ended in many parts of the world, its impact is still felt today.
Precisely. Post-colonial scholars argue that we need to, decolonize our thinking. We need to move beyond those Western-centric views that permeate so much of international relations.
It's about recognizing that those historical power dynamics continue to shape the world today.
Exactly. And it calls for a more inclusive global order, one that recognizes the diversity of cultures and perspectives, especially those that have been historically marginalized.
So it's a call for a more just and equitable world.
It is. And, it strikes me that all of these critical perspectives we've talked about, they're all pushing us to re-examine our assumptions about how the world works.
They're definitely making me think differently about global politics. It's been a really eye-opening journey through all these different perspectives.
Yeah, it has. But I think it's important to pause here and reflect on what we've learned. What does it all mean, especially for those preparing for the UPSC exam?
Yeah, let's break it down. What are the key takeaways? Welcome back, everyone. So we've been on quite the journey exploring these critical perspectives in international relations.
We have, from Marxism and its economic critiques to, even post-structuralism and its focus on language and power.
Yeah, we even talked about feminism and its role in understanding global politics.
And green politics, too, right? Bringing those environmental concerns to the forefront.
It's been a lot to take in. But as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the key takeaways we should keep in mind? Especially for those of us, getting ready for that UPSC exam.
I think one of the most important things to remember is that there's no one right answer when it comes to international relations.
Right. It's not black and white.
Exactly. These critical perspectives, they offer different lenses.
Yeah, like different ways of looking at the world.
Each with its own strengths and limitations. And the key is to use them critically. Understand the biases that might be inherent in any perspective.
It's like having a toolbox. Yeah.
A toolbox.
You have different tools for different situations. And sometimes you need to combine tools to get the job done.
Exactly. And that's where critical thinking comes in. These perspectives encourage us to constantly question those assumptions, to challenge the status quo, to be willing to reevaluate how we understand the world.
Because international relations, it's not static. It's constantly evolving.
It is. And for UPSC aspirants, that critical thinking is, essential. The exam doesn't just test your knowledge, right? It tests your ability to analyze, to form arguments, to present those arguments effectively.
It's about thinking deeply and critically about the world.
And these critical perspectives, they can really give you an edge. They help you analyze those complex international relations questions from multiple angles, and they help you articulate, well, those well-reasoned arguments in your essays and your answers.
They can really make your answers stand out. But it's not just about the exam, right? These perspectives are valuable for anyone who wants to be, well, an informed and engaged global citizen.
I completely agree. They equip us to really assess information, to understand different viewpoints, to participate in those, well, sometimes difficult conversations about the challenges facing our world.
And they empower us to move beyond just observing what's happening and become, agents of change.
I like that, agents of change.
So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, but before we go, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought.
Go for it.
If, as these critical theories argue, knowledge is always linked to power, whose interests are really being served by the theories that are considered mainstream?
Ooh, that's a powerful question. It really makes you think, doesn't it?
It does. It challenges us to think critically about whose voices are amplified and whose are marginalized in how we study and understand international relations.
It's a reminder that the production of knowledge, it's not neutral.
And we should always be questioning those power dynamics.
Always.
Well, this deep dive has been incredibly insightful, and I hope it's inspired all of you to explore these critical perspectives further. They offer valuable tools for understanding the world around us, for doing well on that UPSC exam, and for becoming more informed and engaged global citizens.
And remember that critical thinking, it doesn't end when this episode ends.
Keep those wheels turning, keep questioning, keep learning, keep engaging with those complexities of international relations.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
So that's it for this deep dive. Don't forget to like and subscribe and share this episode with anyone who's interested in understanding the world a little bit better. We'll be back with more deep dives into complex and fascinating topics soon. Until then, keep those critical thinking gears turning.